Our tribute to Al Nagler on episode 509 of the Actual Astronomy Podcast. I'm Chris, and joining me is Shane, and we are amateur astronomers who love looking up at the night sky. And this podcast is for everybody who enjoys going out to under the stars. So we had some sad news this week, Shane.
Yeah. Maybe we should say too that we're recording on November 2nd. This will probably drop a couple weeks after that, but
Mm,
but yeah, sad news in the amateur astronomy world.
yeah, Al Nagler, the creator of the Nagler eyepieces and owner of Teleview Optics, has sadly passed away this week at, I think, about the age of 90, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. He had a long life, and definitely maybe one of the most revolutionary people in the amateur astronomy world, maybe ever, maybe since the telescope was pointed up at the stars. I'm not sure.
Yeah,
He's done a lot for the hobby.
and before we get too far, just we express our condolences to the Nagler family and his
Mhm.
friends, of which many of his friends, associates, and customers listen to this podcast. I would say, it's been very surprising how frequently people have identified themselves as, oh yeah, I was talking to Al Nagler last week, or recently, or this is what Al Nagler told me. And that is extremely common to hear, and perhaps very rare in the world, that somebody owns a company and produces stuff and then is in such frequent contact with the people
Hmm.
that use his products that they see themselves as his, really like his extension of family, and definitely friendship, and everything else, which is super cool, especially in this day and age, for sure.
Yeah, agreed. I never met Al, but many stories about how much he like enjoyed engaging with just other amateur astronomers, whether or not they
Mm.
were customers or I think he really just liked the hobby and loved talking to people about it from everything I've read online. That's my observation.
And I made up some notes just based on stuff I'd read about and heard about Al Nagler over the years. So if I'm wrong here, then I stand corrected, which is fine. But I really didn't have to do much research, just from what I've read and heard from other folks. He was a visionary, really, as you said, Shane, a pioneer in amateur astronomy. Um, and really, that doesn't even begin to describe his impact on amateur astronomy. Like, few people have had as much of an impact as Al Nagler did on observing, and I think there was sort of a confluence of a few things, but one of them was that John Dobson had sort of popularized the use of the sort of easier to build and large aperture Dobsonian, and then these Nagler type eyepieces kind of coincidentally worked superbly, like just like a match made for heaven, so to speak,
Hmm.
um, with those instruments, which really kind of propelled them along. And of course, Al Nagler himself had built some reflectors when he was younger. I think he had a 8-inch f. I want to say like something like an f8 or an f6.5, or something to that effect. And then of course had uh, had sort of pioneered a lot of the amazing apochromats that Teleview put out over the years.
Yeah. Lots of great equipment to come out, over the years, eyepieces and telescopes really being the majority of it, but certainly had other interesting things, filters, bino viewers, even night vision here towards
Mm.
the last, I don't know, what, 5-ish years probably. So lots of interesting things, lots of sort of iconic designs too, I think, for eyepieces that then seem to, get duplicated by many others. But I have a number of Teleview eyepieces in my collection that are part of
Mm.
my regular rotation too, that probably will never leave my collection, which I buy and sell an awful lot. But if it has the green lettering on it, you probably have something of really good quality, and it's going to be pretty tough to beat.
Yeah, yeah. Before starting Teleview, he worked with the Apollo training, like the Apollo mission trainings. And my understanding is that as part of that, and just a part of that, um, I believe the story was that he had helped make the windows in the training simulator so that it would really have that appearance of looking out into space, and that he had hung like ball bearings to represent the constellations, or maybe put another way, I think perhaps they had hung some ball bearings and lit them to kind of sort of represent some stars, and then he went, I think, had corrected them to actually accurately represent the stars. Was one of the stories that I had heard. But yeah, he found a Teleview in 1977. So basically, like most people listening to the show, or a lot of people anyway, especially younger folks, have always lived in a world with Teleview, and I think we're all richer for that.
Oh, absolutely. The like the history. Well, that's as old as me. So it's
Mm.
been my whole life, I guess, with Teleview. But um, yeah, if you're in the hobby, it's pretty hard to imagine you haven't at least heard or read about Teleview, and in many cases, probably also have looked through some of the optics. Whether it's eyepieces and or telescopes. And again, many of us own a lot, some of the stuff that Teleview's put out over the years.
Yeah, 1979. That's when the first Nagler came out, the 13 millimeter massive. I forget, like a 3 pound eyepiece or 2 pound eyepiece or something like that, 82 degree, and then an even larger 20 millimeter followed. And I think the ads on the 20 millimeter had like a tiny little picture, I think, of Al Nagler next to it, if I'm remembering the back of the old magazines that I love to collect.
Oh, really? That's neat.
Yeah, yeah, they're pretty cool. But in recent years, those Naglers, which were sort of known for not only the great views and such, but also their sort of immense size, had shrunk down. I think some of those 13 millimeter Naglers of the Type 6 variety weren't a whole heck of a lot larger than a Plossl almost.
Mm-hmm.
So they have come down far in size, and what made those original eyepieces different than anything before them was that they had a very wide field of view, and they were exceptionally sharp.
Yeah.
But not only that, because those two things probably had existed, but really, I think what sets Teleview and Al Nagler apart is that he was producing them in such quantities and making them available that people could actually get their hands on them.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
Because I
hard to
think
do.
I think at that point, if we were to, look at sort of how the wide field eyepiece has evolved, I think at that point in time, a wide field eyepiece probably would have been of the Koenig design, if I'm not
Yeah,
mistaken. And
yeah,
and I think those are around 60 degrees field of view. But what they're not known for is super sharp to the edge, especially
right.
on faster telescopes. And that's where the Nagler eyepiece or the Nagler design really kind of changed things, because all of a sudden you could have a sharp field that was wide and would work in faster optics too, and do quite well.
Yeah, I think there had been some and kind of more one-offs. I think perhaps even that Doctor 12 and a half that I have is of one of those very early designs. But again, it seems to only work in that 12 and a half millimeter format or something. They haven't seemed to be able to come out with others. There's others that have come out and are around, that come out in like ones or twosies here and there. Um, but to have just like these full ranges of eyepieces, and that like you can walk into a telescope store in Toronto, like I did, um, in the spring there, and you can find a Teleview eyepiece on the shelf to purchase, and often, you can even find one used.
Hmm.
They're just highly available, and really in the grand scheme of things, reasonably priced, especially on the used market. Even they're just something people can go out and be able to put their hands on versus a lot of the other designs, and that yeah, sure, they existed, but how easy are they to actually get your hands on? They're just not.
Yeah, 100%. And just a wide range too, like kind of almost whatever kind of eyepiece you're looking for, like long eye relief, wide field, Plossels for kind of lightweight and ease, like kind of dial in whatever experience you want.
Yeah, and I mean, just so many different types and different eyepieces over the years, and eyepieces coming into production and out, and the ones that go out highly sought after. I think of like the Nagler 26, which is an eyepiece I've always wanted to get. I mean, almost unobtainable on the used market now, simply because it went out of production 7 or 8 years ago or something to that effect, and such an awesome eyepiece. Um, yeah, and just the Panoptics, and then the Delos, and then Delights, and then the Ethos, and the list just goes on, as well as just having a great line of the Teleview Plossels, which are what I started with, and just such fantastic eyepieces. But Shane, do you remember your first view through a Nagler eyepiece?
Yeah. It was a 13 millimeter Nagler, which is quite legendary, as you talked about earlier. Not only was it the first, it's kind of evolved into one of the more interesting ones because it is so small. Like it is about the size of a Plossel, but it gives you this, 80-degree field of view with decent eye relief. It's quite nice, especially for bino viewing. But it was in a 20-inch Obsession Dobsonian. Here, locally, one of the guys in the club, Vance Petru, it's his scope, and I can't remember. I think we were maybe looking at the Veil. Or was it like M13? I don't recall. This is a long, long time ago, but it was one of the first times I looked through a wide field eyepiece, and I was blown away by that. That the field was so large, and I was kind of used to the Plossel views at that point, which, compared to a Nagler, the Plossel feels like you're looking through a straw. So it was a big eye opener, pun intended, that this wide field thing was real. I need to check this out.
Yeah, for me, it was when I went to my first star party in the early 90s, and I was just, a kid in school kind of thing. And I think it was like the first time I really went on any sort of road trip. And I went up into New Brunswick, and there was a few people there with like the 13 and the 20 millimeter. And I remember just looking through like 17 and 18-inch Dobsonians that people had built or bought from Coulter, and just drinking in those wide fields and just being so blown away um, that such things even existed. Really,
Mm,
like
yep.
you can hardly even imagine that those things were something that somebody could even get. Um, and then the Ethos came out in the mid 2000s, and I remember chatting with Tom Trussick, who was really big on Cloudy Night, sadly passed away, I think a dozen years or so ago, and he had a demo, and he was bringing it up to Starfest, and I think I chatted to him before he came up and arranged, and I went and observed with him for most of an evening with that 13 millimeter Ethos, and just such an incredible 100-degree eyepiece. And he had it in one of the Teleview 101 apochromats, one of the sort of newer ones. At that time, this was in I think around 2005 or 2006 or something like that. I guess 2006. And you had one of the Teleview 100 millimeter ish apochromats for a while too, Shane. How was that?
Yeah, I had the Genesis SDF, which was one of the earlier ones, but it had a fluorite element in it. It was a wonderful telescope. It had a dual speed feather touch focuser, and with like paired with the 31 millimeter Nagler that I have, it was just incredible how wide, or like the wide field views, how sharp they were, very bright. And that telescope was built like a tank. Like it was heavy. You needed a pretty good mount for it, but it really worked well. It just oozed quality, and I really enjoyed that telescope. And I'd still have it today. if it wasn't for the fact that I got into bino viewing, and as everybody knows, I like to use a bino viewer natively without any Barlow. And with that SDF, I couldn't do that. I wasn't able to shorten the light path enough, so I ended up with a TSA 102, that replaced the SDF. But it was a wonderful telescope, and I really didn't want to sell it, but I eventually did just because there's only so many 4-inch telescopes I can use at one time. So it didn't make sense to keep it in a case. I wanted it to collect photons because it's such a wonderful scope. And I
And
think you looked through that a couple times too when I had it out, and we had some great views.
yeah, yeah, I think you had it at Grasslands one of those weekends. And
Yeah, grasslands. I think White Butte Trails. We had it out a few times.
yeah, they were really nice. I would like to get one of the original Genesis, though. I looked through those way back in the day. That was one of the first wide field instruments I ever looked through, and I've often thought that I should just have that instrument. It's sort of a historical instrument almost, and it's not fully apochromatic, but it's sort of like a 4-inch f11, but in an f5 format. Um, and just would be such a great wide field instrument to have in the collection. Maybe one day I'll pick one of those up. Apart from these observations, do you have like perhaps like most memorable view where you were just observing, maybe you'd looked through lots of televiewer gear before and then there was something that just really struck you, just like this is just something so special about this equipment, that you could just tell that the person who had created this really had made it with such a deep love and a focus on giving us the best experience under the stars. Is there anything that kind of strikes you, Shane, in your years of observing?
Yeah, and I've kind of had this experience a few times with this eyepiece, but it's the 24 millimeter panoptic.
Mm.
That was the first Teleview eyepiece that I purchased, and I still have it today. And the first time I used it under a dark sky, I think it was at the Saskatchewan Summer Star Party at Cypress Hills, again, many, many years ago. And I was panning through Sagittarius with the 24 millimeter panoptic in my 8-inch Skywatcher Dobsonian, and just again blown away by how much I was able to see because I was used to Plossels with that telescope.
Hmm.
So this thing really opened up some wide field views for that I hadn't had before, and it was a beautiful blend of kind of wide enough field and aperture, and just looking at like the numerous Messier objects, the nebulas, the clusters, all of the things in Sagittarius, just were so incredible. It was like I was observing for the first time, and it was really like what was quite nice is sometimes you end up with a couple of these in the same field of view, but it just frames some objects, especially to me in Sagittarius. Like when you get more of the star field, the objects just take on a almost like an enhanced beauty because of it almost looks photographic then because you're seeing so
Mm.
much of the sky. And like I say, I've had that experience kind of multiple times with that panoptic. In fact, now I have a pair of them so that I can use them with the bino viewers if I want to go with as wide of a field as possible in a 1.25 inch bino viewer. So that's it for me. What about yourself?
There's a few. The most memorable was observing with my friends Peter Becure, Mike Renner, and they had made I think one or a couple 16-inch f5-ish telescopes, and we were looking at NGC 2392, which goes by Clown Face Nebula and other names, and they had an eyepiece in, and I walked up and looked in, and having seen photographs of this, like you said, I never imagined being able to see like a planetary nebula almost with as much detail as a photograph. And with that 4.8 millimeter Nagler was the like pretty much one of the oldest ones because I think they come out with the 4.8 fairly early on. It was a small eyepiece, and the clarity of the view and the ability for the fine optics that Peter and Mike are known for making. and then looking through that eyepiece, which was just like something that never really had occurred to me before, as someone who just looked through mostly larger light buckets of, varying qualities. But those instruments were just such finely made instruments with that eyepiece in, and Peter knew Al a little bit. Actually, I even reached out to him and setting up this podcast, but didn't hear back in time. But anyway, yeah, just the detail. And I think that was running like over 420 or 430 power, just like it was meant to do it. Which really, those eyepieces from Teleview, that's really the magic in their design, is that, yeah, they're just meant to do this, and really a fine, exceptional quality. The other is is the fact that, I guess, like probably about 4 years ago, I end up buying a, not my first Teleview eyepiece by any stretch of the imagination. I've got Barlow's, I've had lots of Plossels, I've had some others, and I always wanted the 20 millimeter, because Mike has the 20 millimeter,
Hmm.
and I don't know, it's one of the older ones, but it might be a Type 2. And I always really, really liked the views. And after a summer where we observed a lot through that eyepiece, and knowing that there was a 22 millimeter Type 4 that had just slightly better eye relief, and I went and picked one up. And that's the eyepiece that, I mean, really, truly, it does live in my 7 inch. Every single observation I do in the 7 inch pretty much starts with an Nagler 22. Um, and often ends with an Angler 22 after I cycle through a whole pile of different eyepieces, because at f6, sort of about a 4 millimeter ish exit pupil is kind of ideal,
Hmm.
for my eye anyway. And it gives just such gorgeous views. I've been able to see some of the halo features in some of the planetary nebulae. Certainly, I've talked about those in the past, but that's the eyepiece I was using to see those. And I mean, it really does. It lives in that scope. I don't have a plug in the 7 inch. Usually people will put a plug in the end of their telescope when they're not using it, and I actually keep the 22 millimeter Nagler in there,
Hmm.
just because, like, I want to have an eyepiece in there ready to go. That's the eyepiece. That's the eyepiece that lives in there. And the telescope, that's the telescope balance point, is for that eyepiece, so that it's always ready to go. And should I not feel like taking anything else up, which has happened, on many occasions, I just go up and observe with a 22 millimeter Nagler. That's it. You know.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've got some of the filters too. I have, several Teleview products, but that definitely that's my absolute favorite one, simply just the ability for that thing to pull in the details. And really, what makes them special in a way is they sort of get out of the way. One of the, famous quotes with Teleview is that, it's like a porthole into space, and it just kind of, it gives you the view, and so you can get on with observing, not sort of futzing with the eyepieces or anything. Like, really, like, I can put that eyepiece in for a night, and that's it. I, can get lots of great observing and never really think about anything else going in the focuser.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, that 22 is a wonderful eyepiece. I've looked through it a few times with like with your 7 inch, and makes me a little jealous. It's one that, like you said, it's almost like kind of the perfect fit, sort of a jack
Mm,
of all trades. You can leave it in all night and really be quite happy. Another one too that I'm starting to enjoy a little bit more is the 3 to 6 millimeter zoom, Nagler zoom.
mm,
But it like in the Borg 90 mil, because the focal length is so short, it can take some of that power, and
mm,
it's kind of handy because at those magnifications, every little sort of almost micro like magnification addition gets you closer to that limit, of what you're able to see through the atmosphere. So you can almost like fine tune it for as close as you can get to that limit before the image starts to degrade And as a double star observer, sometimes you want that big power in order to separate, the two stars. So it's been an eyepiece that's getting a little more use out of me.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. No, I can see it. I can see it for sure. But yeah, no, it's really sad that that
Hmm.
he has passed away as it is when anybody does, and especially when there's not as many people committed to the hobby of amateur astronomy as Al Nagler was. Like I know in talking with people, like it's just astounding how many listeners, both people who are newcomers. We had somebody who started listening to the podcast and is pretty good at reaching out, Leonid, and he would frequently write and chat with Al Nagler, um, and say, "Oh, this is what Al Nagler said," or whatever, which is really, really cool. And then I know that he would go to the star parties, in particular Stellafane, as somebody who was a real maker. I mean, kind of like almost hard to wrap your head around that here's a person who has a telescope company. Like you think of that as really being like commercial, right? Sort of quote
Hmm.
unquote. But but I think like just from what I gather, like that's in a way like how he was viewed. Like he would go there to be around other builders, makers, which
Hmm.
is like he saw himself, I think, as one of those, if I can make that sort of imagination. And I think that showed in the products. Like somebody who could build and make stuff like this. I mean, it's sort of astounding, worked on the Apollo program, individual of this kind of caliber and intelligence probably could have gone on to do a whole host of other things, perhaps made, more money doing other things or been, regarded in a variety of other industries and whatever. But to commit to doing this for amateur astronomy is, I mean, we're all just so fortunate to be sort of the beneficiaries of somebody who spent, really decades developing and improving eyepieces and then guiding amateur astronomers both for, using that equipment as well as for just observing in general, just a real love for it. Like I was always so surprised when his son David took it on and then you would still see Al so deeply involved in going to events and doing. I heard from a listener who had gone to an astronomy event in New York or New Jersey, and Al Nagler had shown up with a telescope or had given a talk and then set up a telescope and was doing telescope views outside. This was just like months ago, I think. So here is somebody who really is just sort of like a true amateur astronomer who really loved it, obviously, and then also was somebody of immense talent and capability to be able to produce these type of instruments for us all to enjoy. Yeah, so real loss for us, real loss for his family, I'm sure, but great long life he lived, fortunately for all of us.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, agreed.
Anything else to add, Shane? I mean, I think that's sort of what I had down here. Really, a great amateur astronomer, great company, and really. Oh, I know the thing I wanted to mention is that I think one of the true hallmarks of the Naglers and Teleview is that everything gets compared to them, right? Like if you got a different
You're right.
eyepiece
You're right. Yeah.
if you got a different eyepiece or whatever, someone would say, well, how does it compare to an Nagler? Right. And to be honest, there's always compromises and adjustments that have to be made in eyepieces. And, it's just one of those sort of the great, I guess, legacies is that's how instruments and other eyepieces are typically compared as how do they compare to a Nagler or an Ethos or you name it. That's a tremendous thing to be left with. Really, pretty cool.
Yeah, it really is the standard or has been the standard for quite some time.
Yeah. All right. With that, anything further, or shall we leave it there?
I think that's a good place to wrap it, Chris.
Yeah, so again, our condolences to his friends and family, and I know his celebration of life was this past Wednesday, and we wanted to put something out and to sort of put it out, sometime after, and really, hope that people think well of him as we did, and we'll just leave it there. So thanks so much for listening.
Thank you everyone for listening, and we hope you enjoyed the show. If you are interested in more information, would like to contact us, or if you would like to support the podcast, check out our website, actualastronomy.com.